basically in the house, we have a radiant heat here that is in the floor. We have radiators in the house that is also tied to this on another pump. And the heat source is either oil, which is the boiler, or it's wood in the boiler room outside. And these are the supply and return for the wood boiler. It goes into a heat exchanger here that the system pulls hot water, whether it's from the boiler or whether it's from the oil boiler or the wood boiler. So depending on which one we want to use, the changeover from wood to oil is automatic. And that control is in the boiler room with the wood boiler,
Okay.
which we'll point out later.
Does Scrat have anything to do with it, or is he just there as an overseer?
So obviously this is the oil boiler, and the wood boiler we'll look at later. We have a series of pumps here. We have basically 4 zones, and each pump serves a particular zone, and they are labeled on the pumps. They are controlled by thermostats in the main room, and then each bedroom has one, and the bonus room has a thermostat. So they are night set thermostats so that at a prescribed time on the thermostat it goes to a lower temperature. So that's the basic overview of the system. The solar system is completely separate. This water storage tank is heated by the solar system and also by the wood boiler through this heat exchanger here. When the wood boiler runs, that heat exchanger gets hot, a control starts a pump which circulates hot water through a coil in the bottom of the storage tank. At the same time, if we have a bright sunny day, or anytime we have a rise in temperature with the coils on the roof, this Caleffi solar little computer handles everything. It lets us know what the temperature is, and we have buttons on here to go ahead. This is the outside temperature at the coil on the roof, so you can select what you want. When the temperature rises in here, that control will start this pump in the solar system and recirculate water through the coil on the roof back into the heat exchanger in the boiler, in the water tank, and it will heat the water. It has, and then also the wood boiler will, through a control, heat the storage tank. All the water, all our hot water comes into this tank first as cold.
And this is not the water for the heating of the radiant heat. This is the domestic.
Domestic water comes into this tank first. And if there's no heat in this tank, it goes to our electric tank as cold water. And the electric is always on and maintains a temperature of 120 degrees. So basically this solar system is completely automatic. There's nothing to turn it on, turn it off. It works completely on sensors and that main control that I showed you. Okay, the water that is circulated through the coils on the roof and the heat exchanger is completely separate from domestic water. And it is an antifreeze system, so that you don't have to worry about it in the winter. It's will go down very low temperature before it's a problem. This gives you an idea of what the level of the water is in this water feed system. Now, we go by a gauge here, and if we need to add water to the system, if for some reason we lose the water with the antifreeze system, we use this reserved antifreeze water to put back into the system. And we do that by using an air pressure gauge, put air in at this point, and then open this valve and this valve down here to put,
So you put the antifreeze in here,
so we put antifreeze in
or
there.
in here?
Yeah,
Okay.
we keep a level in there, we know what we have to do. So if we had to add water or put more antifreeze into the system, this is the thing that we use, this.
Okay.
And the gauge glass shows how much is in there now. Here, takes water from the heat exchanger and recirculates it through the boiler and to this four-way valve, which goes into this manifold up here and keeps the manifold at a certain temperature. Now, this valve, a four-way valve, mixes the return water and the supply water to give you a set temperature, which is controlled by this controller. It's set at 120 degrees, and so if our boiler temperature, either wood or oil, is 180, that four-way valve will mix return water and supply water to give us a discharge of 120 degrees, which is maximum for the radiant floor. So that control there will give you the temperature of the water going to the radiant system.
So that's a way to disperse extra heat, is that?
That's a way to heat the house. I mean, the 120 degrees is what circulates through the floor and the radiators.
Okay. So you can have too much, if it's too hot, it cools it down, but that's a little inefficient, right? I mean, you try not to heat things up so hot in the wood boiler then.
Oh, it doesn't make any difference. You need the high temperature in the wood boiler to heat domestic water.
Okay,
So
okay.
our wood boiler
Yeah.
temperature could go as high as 190 degrees. And it's just and this four-way valve mixes return water with it to drop the temperature to
For
120.
the radiant heat
For the radiant heat and the radiators.
and the radiators. Yeah.
Okay. Now,
And right now it says 80 on here. What does that mean? That means we're not calling for heat and the system is only 80?
yeah, it's not calling for heat. You can select the boiler temperature here by going to boiler or going to system.
Okay.
And it will tell you, and it does a really good job of handling the 120 degrees and modulating back and forth to give you that. So it's been faultless as far as, ever since I've had it in, over what, 14 years or something like that, so. So, that's the basic system. If you want me to go in more detail, I can.
Just look at, he looks sold. All right. Okay, so,
What would you like next?
yeah, so, why don't you describe, so the system, if it's not sunny out, this system isn't producing hot water at all, the solar system. And if you're and if you're not running the wood boiler, which is outside, we look at later, then that's not producing any heat, and so it would then automatically go to the oil-fired boiler,
Correct.
all to create, you know, the amount of heat you need, which,
Yeah.
yeah, that's it. Okay.
Now, the oil-fired boiler responds to each zone. In other words, it could be only one zone calling for heat. And this control here on each zone starts the pump and starts the boiler for
Okay.
one zone. Should all of them call for heat, then they all work together and open up and start the pumps, and you heat the whole system.
Right. But as long as you have the wood boiler going and you keep it stoked and it
Yes.
keeps it up, then the oil boiler really never kicks on.
Yes, correct. And that happens when the wood boiler reaches 120 degrees. When that happens, there's a relay in here that locks out the oil-fired boiler. As long as the temperature is
Okay.
120 degrees, it locks it out. As soon as it drops below that, it starts the oil boiler, and it will keep running as long as the temperature is below 120 degrees in the wood boiler.
So if you stoke the wood boiler once a day,
Yeah.
and it's the springtime temperatures, will the oil boiler ever kick on?
It depends on the thermostat. If the room temperature goes down
Yeah.
and you have all the switches on for it to work, the oil-fired boiler will come on.
Okay. And so how often, the way you're operating it right now with, you know, keeping that wood boiler stoked, how often does it come on?
In this kind of weather, you could run the wood boiler if it's a little cool and we need heat and you wanted to do the wood, you could do that, and once a day would be plenty.
Okay. And then this would never kicks on for
No.
domestic water or for heat?
No, this doesn't make domestic
Oh,
water.
it doesn't make any domestic water, okay.
Domestic water is made by the electric
Okay, got it.
or the solar
Yep.
or the wood boiler.
Does he have
Yeah, I got it.
What happens with excess heat? Let's say you were calling for heat, the fire's not going, the boiler kicks on, and for some reason you go out and start a big raging fire in the wood
Okay.
gun. How does it dissipate heat? And
That's a good question.
Oh, wow, I get a gold star.
When that happens, and the wood boiler is pretty hot, say 190 degrees, and we need to get rid of the heat, it automatically opens or starts the pump for the bonus room, and whether it needs heat or not, it's going to get heat. It also starts the domestic water pump, the hot water pump, through the circuit, through the heat exchanger, and it will raise the temperature of the water in here, in the first tank, the solar
Okay.
tank. As soon as the temperature drops to about 180, it will shut down the bonus room. It won't serve any more heat up there, and it won't continue to heat. So you have to kind of realize how much wood you need and how hot you want the boiler. So as long as it's below 190 degrees, that won't happen. But as soon as it gets that hot, it will automatically, through a relay in here, bring on the domestic water pump to raise the temperature and the bonus rate.
And where would we see this temperature? I mean, if we go upstairs and it's really hot up there and it's not, you know, from the sun or something like, where do we see this 190 degrees? Is that out at the,
You see it right here.
okay,
This is the supply temperature, and this is the return temperature. The difference is what we take out
okay.
in
Heat
here.
exchanger.
The basic difference.
And this is the brain, it's gonna
No.
match those.
The temperature differential can be as much as 20 degrees. In other words, it can come in at 200 and go out at 180, back to the boiler, back to the wood boiler. So, and it can be less than that, it can be done clear under 10 degrees, depending on the load. But it is a pretty efficient system in that the wood boiler doesn't shut down on high temperature very often because it gives more load to the system and takes away the heat in the wood boiler, so it doesn't shut off. You don't want it to cycle. It will shut off on its own if it continues to raise.
When you mean shut off, what do you mean by shut off? Like,
The boiler,
The
the wood
fans,
boiler, the
the-
fan stops, the dampers close,
And the fire
the
just
fire
goes
goes out.
okay,
If you had a problem operating the wood boiler, my suggestion would be do not operate it and let it work automatically off the oil-fired boiler. When you get enough experience with the wood boiler, then you can go ahead, start slowly, and get used to it, the system.
just by monitoring the temperatures
Yeah.
here, okay.
Yeah, and listen for the wood boiler to shut down and the oil fire will start up, if the house is calling for heat, or any of the zones.
Oh, hazards.
There are some hazards with the wood boiler. What happens if it shuts down automatically, it's imperative that you run the exhaust fan on the wood boiler long enough to dissipate any combustible fumes in the wood boiler. Normally what happens is the cycle between the wood boiler shutting down and for it to come back on, there's enough temperature differential that it has time for the the coals to just dissipate and it has no oxygen, so it won't burn. The hazard is if you open the door when you have a combustible mixture in there and it gets a little oxygen, it can pop. So,
So only do that on 4th of July.
And I'll look like this.
so the normal cycle is that the fan comes on, it's calling for heat again, the boiler's hot but it's cooled down, so the fan comes on first, then the damper to let air into the combustion chamber opens. As soon as that happens, then the fire comes alive and the coals, they get red hot and they lights the wood and you're back on a heating system.
Okay.
The hazard is to open it up, you know, when it's just shut off or something, and you can ignite those fumes.